Hello, everybody. Welcome to a new episode of Tech Can't Save Us podcast, brought to you by Literal Humans. As always, I am your host, Paul David. Without my co-host, Will Gadsby-Pete today. And yeah, we're joined today by a great guest. We're going to talk about building well-connected neighborhoods with Michael Wood-Lewis, the co-founder and CEO of Front Porch Forum. Welcome to the show, Michael.
Hello, Paul. Thank you so much for having me. Looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, we are too. I think you were a referral from another podcast guest. We had Sahar Masachi, speak about the good work that you were doing, and we're like, we got to get Michael and the folks at FPF on. So thank you for taking the time.
Absolutely.
Cool. Well, first things first, I wanted to just kind of introduce Front Porch Forum, an online community building service based in Vermont. You all launched in 2006, and your aim is to kind of connect neighbors through local forums that only local people can access. So I'd love to just hear a little bit more, about that, just to kind of, orient our listeners.
Sure. So yes, Front Porch Forum is a small local business here in the state of Vermont. And my wife, Valerie, and I started it in 2006. We're now joined by, our headcount is up to 30 employees that we work with here.
Wow.
And we serve every town and neighborhood in our small state. We provide a local online forum, business directory, and a community calendar for each of those locales.
Very cool. Very cool. And one of the things that struck me from the conversation with Sahar was just about, kind of this role of technology and sort of local community building, and just curious about, what you've experienced and seen as the benefits of local forums like Front Porch Forum.
Sure. So we've been at this a long time. So you mentioned we incorporated in 2006. But going back to the year 2000 is when we first started our initial pilot in our own neighborhood in Burlington, Vermont. So I guess that makes it 24, nearly 25 years that we've been hosting online local conversations among neighbors.
Congrats.
And yeah, well, thank you. And we've always taken very much of a curious learning mindset. Growth mindset, really, to how to do this effectively to achieve our social mission. And our social mission is pretty straightforward. It's helping neighbors connect and build community. And we started Front Porch Forum, and we started the precursor to FPF to help facilitate our own needs in our own community, to plug in to activities that were going on around us. We were raising four young kids at the time, and we wanted to be integrated in a real part of the community, and we wanted lots of great things to happen. And so we thought, well, if we could facilitate civil, constructive, daily points of communication and connection among neighbors, there's so many great people around us. More good stuff will happen, and we'll all be in the know. And so that's been our basic model, is to provide a civil, constructive online space where neighbors can come on and just do the simple stuff of everyday life. Find the lost dog, borrow the ladder, sell a used bike, recommend a mechanic, whatever it might be among neighbors. But you're doing it instead of with anonymous strangers, like you do on Craigslist or Airbnb or Yelp or Uber. All those kind of things happen on Front Porch Forum, but with clearly identified nearby neighbors. You get a ride to the airport, you get a weekend rental for your in-laws to stay around the corner. All that stuff's been happening on our service for 24 years. And when you do that over and over and over, you get to know your neighbors more. You get a feeling of, hey, things are possible here. I'm connected. I'm part of something.
Because you mentioned your kids, and it seems like they grew up with Front Porch Forum. So I come from this as I used to be an educator. Curious to see how you've seen the forum grow through their eyes, like their participation. Like, what have you seen them learn and do and experience through the forum as they grew up with it?
Well, that's interesting. So Front Porch Forum um, is not designed for kids or teens
Hmm.
or even college age students,
Okay.
which is kind of the opposite of, Facebook started obviously as,
Yeah.
aimed at college age kids, and Instagram and TikTok and all that, seems to be geared towards the age range I just said we're not interested in so much.
Hmm.
The people who get the most value out of Front Porch Forum are folks who are now at a stage in life where they're invested in their local community.
Hmm.
They've become property owners or small business owners, or critically, they have kids or kids in the school system, public school system, and suddenly, they're not moving to every year to a new apartment like you might do in your younger years. That said, we have lots and lots of kids who participate, sometimes through their parents' accounts or sometimes directly once they, I think you have to be 14 to have a Front Porch Forum account. I can't remember. We have several committed parents on our staff who want to, make sure we're being responsible towards kids. But they'll sign up and they'll offer, babysitting, dog walking services. Looking to make a buck,
Hmm.
or find a summer job. They'll find free sports equipment. Hand me down. This is Vermont, so hand me down ice skates or snowboarding gear, that kind of thing.
Interesting.
It's pretty common.
Yeah. How do you get through there's this I think it was a 2002 Stanford Social Innovation Review piece about the local paradox. So like this idea that a lot of local social networks are just as toxic, if not more, than some of the big global ones that you've mentioned. What's been your experience with that, with the Front Porch Forum? Have you solved the quote unquote local paradox? How have you made it a rich, virtuous community?
Well, it's a challenge and it takes a lot of work. And so the article you mentioned, I think, came out a couple of years ago.
Mhm.
And as I said, we've been doing this since 2000. So
Yeah.
we've kind of developed our own systems and pioneered our own approach. Uh, in parallel, Silicon Valley, big tech, got into social media and developed their own kind
Mhm.
of standards. Our approach is quite different. We review and moderate every member posting
Wow.
before publication.
Wow.
So, not too different than what a newspaper traditionally has done with a letter to the editor
Hmm.
or a classified ad. You submit something, someone looks at it, and then it's published.
Hmm.
So, our neighborhood forums come out in the form of a kind of issue once a day. So
Hmm.
once a day in your small town or your neighborhood here in Vermont, you'll get either through our mobile app or our website or via email, you'll get that day's local forum issue
Hmm.
with a collection of 5, 10, 15 postings from neighbors, mostly, but also from some small local businesses or area nonprofits. Local government officials will climb on board and they'll add a few points. And that's the day's issue. And you read it and you think about it and you act on it, or you don't, or maybe you just skim it or you don't even look at it today, but then you look at it tomorrow. People come back day after day and year after year
Hmm.
because they tend to get value. It's a high signal to noise ratio.
So it sounds like a part of this is just slowing it down a bit. Like you have moderation, so that takes time. And
Moderation and slowing it down,
yeah.
two big factors.
So
And you can't, you essentially have to be part of the community to participate.
hmm Interesting. Okay. That's a great segue in the next question, which, the Pew Research has cited that 57% of American adults participate in at least one community group. So just curious, a lot of folks maybe want to participate in community groups, but, maybe they're held back by psychological or material barriers. So just curious how how you've striven to kind of make Front Porch Forum more inclusive, and what strategies you've employed to create an inclusive community on FPF.
Yes. Yeah, great question. Um, so anybody can sign up for Front Porch Forum, and we encourage everyone to give it a shot. In I should point out that Vermont's a very small state
Yeah.
and more heterogeneous than many along various demographic lines, especially race, ethnicity. Very white state. That said, I think I can't remember if it's 3 dozen different languages spoken in my kids' high school, public high school. We have a lot of new Americans here, et cetera. Um, Now I lost my thread here.
Just about the inclusivity and how you've made Front Porch
Oh,
Forum.
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All good. Yeah.
Yeah. So we encourage everyone to sign up, and in our small state, among the 270,000 households that exist here, we have 230,000 members.
Wow.
So we have amazing levels of traction.
Yeah.
More people use Front Porch Forum than use Facebook in Vermont.
Wow.
And so people can sign up and just watch the content, just read and search and look at things, or they can speak up. Front Porch Forum is primarily text based, so there's not a lot of images going by. And yeah, we and then the moderation, we certainly have policies in place around respecting differences and limiting personal attacks. Certainly, we're not permitting racist rants and things like that. And so we try to create a welcoming environment where there are clear guidelines, ground rules that we enforce.
Are there any groups, that you've struggled to sort of bring onto the platform? Any specific groups in Vermont's broader population?
I would say various new American communities where there are significant language and cultural barriers, and they're just getting their feet on the ground. That said, oftentimes, there's active refugee resettlement programs here. These are folks who have real material needs. They're eager to find furniture and clothing and all sorts of things, especially in our cold winters here. And so the local folks who support them, either as volunteers or through nonprofit or government agencies, will often turn to Front Porch Forum to get a great community response. Yep. Hey, I need bedding for a family of 6, that kind of thing. And next thing you know, they've got stacks of bedding arriving on their literal front porches.
Interesting. You mentioned a really interesting stat, and we'd be remiss. We're a sort of marketing and growth strategy agency, so we'd be remiss about not asking you a question that's focused on growth and how you've grown this thing. I saw that you're hiring for an advertising sales pro, and just curious. And you mentioned obviously the stat of 270,000 households in Vermont, and you've got 230,000 individuals on the platform. Is that right?
Yes.
So just curious about how have you grown the thing, and how are you thinking about taking it to new heights? How are you thinking about reaching, almost every household in Vermont, and just sort of your expansion plans and your growth strategy? Just very curious.
Well, we're slow and steady. If you're familiar with the tortoise and the hare, we're definitely more tortoise than hare. And I'm fine with that. I way back when in Web 1.0 days,
Hmm.
around the year 2000, I was involved with a dot-com startup where we got, raised $1 million in venture money and hired 40 people overnight. And
Hmm.
6 months later, I was laying off 40 people, and,
Wow.
everything imploded. Um, and shortly after, I started this experiment in our own neighborhood, and then several years later, decided to incorporate and develop Front Porch Forum. And at that moment, I said, I don't want to be the hare. I want to be the tortoise. I want to be slow and steady on this. I'm building this to last,
Hmm.
with my colleagues. And so we've been, yeah, just very slow and intentional. And always the way that's worked for us is to center on our mission. So everything comes back to building social capital among neighbors to increase community resilience.
Hmm. Gotcha. One thing we've talked about in this podcast before is the concept of digital poverty and folks like not having, access to sometimes high-speed internet or internet at all, access to hardware that allows them to access the web, just,
Mhm.
sort of digital literacy skills. Is that something you encounter or worry about as you're trying to build this community on Front Porch Forum?
From the very beginning, it's been a challenge for us, and it persists today, unfortunately. Although as a society have gotten better, but yes, access to the hardware,
Hmm.
to the connectivity, and to the skills needed to participate in digital life, are a challenge in lots of places, including our very rural communities here in
Right.
Vermont. Vermont's a very hilly spot, and sell it in our lightly populated areas that are very hilly. Um, it's very expensive to run fiber. It's very
Yeah.
close to impossible to get cell signals down into the valleys, and so it's a real challenge. That said, our approach has been to keep the baseline Front Porch Forum user experience very, very low bandwidth,
Hmm.
um, and very simple to understand. So if you can receive an email and
Hmm.
read it, you can get the lion's share of the value of Front Porch Forum right
Hmm.
there. And maybe you're going to the local library to do that, or maybe you do it while you're at work, or maybe you do it when you drive into town once a week, and you have your phone with you, and you get a good cell signal, and you download a week's worth of forums, and then you read them later. But we have people participating, all up and down the various demographic spectrums.
Interesting. So in a sense, like keeping it somewhat lower tech is a way to ironically get people more involved in the tech and make it more accessible, it sounds like.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't have to be able to produce video or whatever to participate on Front Porch Forum. It's just, it's very simple.
Mm-hmm. Want to ask you about just like taking a turn. You've led several purpose-driven startups across various fields. Just looking kind of at your impressive resume: Northeast Rural Water Association, forestworld.com, Public Technology Inc. Always with kind of a bent towards environmental policy. Sounds like. Just curious about some of the lessons you've learned from those experiences and sort of what advice you have for other folks out there looking to start purpose-driven entities that are, loosely connected to tech and trying to make the world a better
Hmm.
place.
I appreciate that. I I realized, coming out of school, that I had moments where I was a brilliant student, but then unfortunately a lot of times when I wasn't so strong. And I thought it was all about the subject matter. And then I
Mm,
thought, oh no, it's all about the instructor, the educator. But eventually I came to realize it was all about if my passion had been ignited or not.
mm,
And differential equations, no matter who was teaching it, was not igniting my passion.
right.
And it did for a couple of my classmates, and more power to them. But what I came to realize was I could always count on feeling passionate about social issues that mattered to me. Environmental issues, issues of justice, relieving some of the suffering and injustice that's in this world of ours. So So that's where I turned my career towards. And my background is in engineering. I have an MBA as well, a business degree. But rather than go into kind of the corporate side of things, I decided to go more in the nonprofit direction
Hmm.
and in the States here. And that worked really well for me. Years later, when I was looking at Front Porch Forum as a concept, having worked in the nonprofit sector and worked with government agencies and tried several different formats of things, I decided to start Front Porch Forum as a for-profit business
Hmm.
because I thought that gave us the best opportunity to succeed.
Right. Interesting. Curious, like you've gotten a lot of plaudits, like The Verge described FPF as a model online community. There's a documentary made about you all that's it's called the story of Vermont's quiet digital revolution, which is these are powerful, powerful words. Curious to hear your predictions about like do you think some of the big tech firms or maybe even other local entities and other states or localities will learn from FPF and potentially scale in those places or take some of the lessons that you all have built over the past 24 years now. Just curious what you
Yeah.
see coming forward and any threats to local communities in this space.
Well, I have kind of a radical notion on this. And by radical, I mean like at the root.
Mm.
Um, and that is, and this I got, from colleagues I've worked with over the years, but and people who've inspired me. But so much of where my energy is focused is around scale,
Hmm.
and I think a lot. That is to say, Front Porch Forum is small scale, and it's small intentionally. Front Porch Forum is successful with its social mission. It's successful with its employees. It's successful in a very small way financially. And that's all by design, and it all hinges on its scale. People often ask, like, why don't you, blow it up and take Front Porch Forum everywhere, and it can be the next Facebook, the next
Hmm.
TikTok.
Hmm.
That wouldn't work for a variety of reasons, but chief among them is, if you have a favorite local restaurant that sources its foods from local farms and is woven into the community and hosts fundraisers for all sorts of important things, and the chef and the owners of the restaurant are active member communities and serve on local boards and all this kind of stuff. That's a great local institution. If you go to them and say, "Hey, I have this great idea. Why don't you become McDonald's?
Hmm.
And let's create 10,000 of your restaurants all over the place.
What
Won't
a
that be
goal.
great?"
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, on the surface, you could, that's not going to happen.
Hmm.
If you did that, you might end up with a McDonald's, a new type of fast food chain that had, a slightly more healthy salad bar, and maybe they give 1% of their profits to charity or something. It's like, okay, but it doesn't really, it's about scale.
Hmm.
And so in the digital world, in the food world, people understand about eating local. I think that there's a wide movement where people have come to understand that.
Hmm.
And even in retail, people can understand, wrap their heads around the idea of buying local versus buying at Walmart and how that'll support the local hardware store, that kind of thing. But in the digital realm, people have never quite got the idea of clicking local, that it
Mm.
makes a difference if you have a local online option to use them over Google and Facebook and the like. Um, and one might ask, it's like, well, what's the difference? I'm not spending money. I'm just clicking on, Craigslist link versus, and I like Craigslist, but I like the work Craig's done, but a Google link versus a Front Porch Forum or other local option. But of course, in much of the digital realm, the economy isn't so much dollars and cents as it is attention.
Hmm. Yeah.
So just like it matters where you spend your food dollars, It matters where you spend your retail dollars. I argue it matters where you spend your digital attention. And if
Yeah.
you have local options, I encourage people to really support those local options.
Yeah, I think that's a really fantastic analogy, though. Of like obviously the Eat Local movement has been, really, really powerful, really effective, and this idea of like your digital attention, your eyeballs, your clicks, your ears to some extent, should go locally as well. And kudos to you. I mean, I think you've built a prime and wonderful exemplar of a great local institution that people can tap into. That's a real and formidable, frankly, competitor for some of these other much broader social networks that I think globalize things that maybe don't always need to be globalized, like they globalize our concern. Like, yes, we should be concerned about what's happening in some places if there's an earthquake or a war or something like that. I get that. But there's also so much good work to be done in our local communities and connecting with our neighbors. People worried about what's happening in, across the world, and they don't know their neighbor's name or
Right,
that
right.
they could help them with something, and it's great to see someone dealing with that. So that's really,
There, a couple surveys to reference.
yeah.
26%, I believe, is the number of Americans who know most of their neighbors by sight.
Wow.
Was a
Wow.
survey a while ago, so about a quarter. And a similar question was asked in Vermont last year, 79%.
Whoa. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, cause and effect, I'm not sure, but I would like to think Front Porch Forum has had a significant role to play in helping neighbors connect and build community. And, it adds up.
I
It
think
adds
that's a
up.
really powerful stat, and it'd be cool to, I'm sure some like, entrepreneurial PhD student could dig into that and try to attribute a portion of that to Front Porch Forum. But that's
Yeah.
amazing. I mean, so really well done. And I love this tagline that this idea of Front Porch Forum as a neighborhood block party online. Like that's fantastic.
Mm,
Like everyone kind of knows the spirit of like a nice summer barbecue, and everyone's in the street, and the
right.
kids are playing, and like if you can create that. Camaraderie and esprit de corps, digitally, I think that's incredible. So, well, cool, Michael. This has been a fantastic conversation. I want to really respect your time. And where can folks find out more about Front Porch Forum, and how can they help you in your growth journey?
Well, sure. You can find us at frontporchforum.com. And we have a lot of resources there if people are interested in learning more about our model here. We love to, share what we've learned. So check out our website. We have several different folks around the country and around the world we've heard from who want to try something similar in their own location. And yeah, that's like I say, if you want to help us out, click local. Find if there's a local news source that's operating in your community, support them. And if there's other local forms of social media or other things, check that out and be a positive contributor.
Yeah, and what one you raised a good question there. Like a follow up, I forgot to ask is, are you all doing any like consulting with like sort of folks looking to replicate Front Porch Forum in their localities? And if so, are there any interesting similar sort of replicants you want to shout out?
I don't think I can point to any right now,
Sure.
but we certainly hear from lots of folks.
Hmm.
We've our software we use has been custom built over decades. It's
Hmm.
got a lot of our experience built into it. It's very particular to our our narrow version of how to do this. That is to say, if you're starting from scratch, you might, in 2024, you might start with some very different baseline assumptions than what we've been working with.
Yeah.
But yeah, I encourage folks to see what they can find.
Yeah. Well, I think you're a prime example of sort of why we started our agency, and we work with Tech for Good and charities and nonprofits. But and also why we named our podcast what we did, Tech Can't Save Us, because we actually like to interview folks who we think are doing amazing work with tech that actually is helping to save the world, as it were. And just the fact that you said average American, only 26% know their neighbors, and whereas in Vermont, upwards of 70, almost 80% actually know their neighbors. I'm sure a good chunk of that's attributed to the work you've done over the past 24 years. So, thank you for that.
Paul, I'll just say one other thing here
Yeah.
that related to your work and what I understand this podcast to be. It's our intention that people spend 5 or 10 minutes a day with
Mm,
Front Porch Forum, and
mm,
then that turns into real connection in real life with real people. And they see. I saw something just the other day on my forum. Someone was giving away some houseplants. My teenager wants houseplants in his room. He went over, talked to the folks, made a real connection.
nice.
Didn't know him, made a connection. And that person who posted said, yeah, I heard from like 8 different people. So I just had 8 conversations with neighbors. And, you know, that's the point isn't to draw people in to spend ever larger percentages of their dwindling time on earth staring at a piece of glass, staring
Hmm.
at their screen, is to use that screen as, I think, the original promise of the internet to kind of decentralize things and help us connect in meaningful ways, to lead to better outcomes, to lead to better, richer, fuller, more stable, lives.
Yeah, no, I think it's really well said, and it's one of the reasons we don't frankly dwell on dwell time, for example, to your point, as a metric, right? Because we don't believe that that's a great metric to say, oh, this person's been staring at a glass screen for hours. Like, we're actually like, did you make an emotional connection with that individual using tech as your vehicle? Are you connecting them to a product or service that's actually making their life better in a real way? So I definitely feel you on that. That's sort of why we founded the agency, not to keep folks behind screens, but to actually, move them to action and move them out into the real world. So really appreciate
Love
what
it.
you're doing. And yeah, this has been another great episode of Tech Can't Save Us podcast by Literal Humans. Fantastic conversation today with Michael Wood Lewis, the co-founder and CEO of Front Porch Forum. Go check them out. They're doing amazing work connecting neighbors and folks up in Vermont. And yeah, we're just really grateful for your time today, Michael. Thanks again.
Thank you, Paul.
All right. Thanks.